My name is Mark Gyure. I'm the Executive Director for the Center of Quantum Science and Engineering at UCLA, and I'm also an Adjunct Professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department, and I have a research group that works on semiconductor spin qubits.
For this documentary, we don't focus a lot on the hardware and the laboratory part. We have more question about the computation, I would say, or especially on the math of the computation. And of course, the title says specifically on the encryption and the public key encryption, the potential that can be broken. So I would just have your general thoughts about that.
So I think, as most people are aware, what really kickstarted the whole field was really the development of the Shor algorithm for factoring. And this provided the promise for a quantum computer to be able to basically decode public key encryption in practical timescales relative to what a classical algorithm running on a classical computer would take. So right now, the current key lengths are such that it would take hundreds of years of computation on a classical computer in order to break the keys. That could be done in a matter of, depending on the technology and details of the implementation, at least practical timescales given a quantum computer. So, so that got the field really moving, at least in terms of government interest, as you could imagine, right? And so there's been a lot of progress, I think, in the field over the last 25, 30 years since that happened. But it has taken a long time to get there. I think there was an initial thought that maybe a quantum computer would be 10 years away or something at that time. Turned out to be a much more difficult technical problem than people anticipated. But I think we are now getting much, much closer to realizing the goal of having a large-scale quantum computer that could potentially, be disruptive in the national security arena. So I think it's still quite a ways away, meaning we're 5 to 10 years away probably from really being concerned about a quantum computer being large enough to address these problems in a practical time frame. But their breakthroughs happen all the time, both on the algorithm side as well as on the hardware side. And so I think we're getting close to the point where a few breakthroughs here and there could maybe even accelerate that time frame. I'm skeptical of that personally, but nevertheless, 5 to 10 years is not that far away.
Right. And concerning, actually, I had a question about the breakthrough. The breakthrough is not about the amount of qubits only, but it's also about the math, or especially the algorithms. In fact, so far we know only about the Peter Shor algorithm, but the breakthrough can be another algorithm.
Certainly. Yes, absolutely. That's definitely true. And in fact, I would argue that the algorithmic breakthroughs and advances are much harder to predict because there's not a clear path to developing those kinds of things. They're really more sort of lightning bolt sorts of revelations that people come to that lead to those kinds of advances. But there's another aspect to algorithms also, and that is just the algorithm, not necessarily the fundamental algorithm like the Shor algorithm, but all of the other pieces of the algorithm that need to be implemented in order to do the Shor algorithm. There's been a lot of advances in decreasing the computational resources that are required in order to do these kinds of calculations. And in fact, I think Google is just ready to put out a paper, if they haven't already, where basically through algorithmic advances just in the implementation of the algorithm, they are able to show that they can factor a 2048-bit key with much fewer resources than what was originally estimated even just a year ago.
Yeah, I think that's a paper that I've seen, and I think we've even discussed. And it's a percentage. I'm not saying it's maybe about a 20% improvement in the number of qubits. It can be noisier. Yeah, it's right. So yeah, it's almost like how you do the qubits could also just knock it down to far less. Yeah,
that's right.
For advances in hardware or something. Yeah.
So there's advances in many different areas aside from even just the fundamental algorithm that can chip away at making these problems more practical and more solvable in a sort of time frame of a few years as opposed to a few decades.
Yeah. Since you also have a background in computer science, I wonder what is your general thought about the fact that today we are so dependent on this cryptographic system?
I think it's definitely it's a concern that we've relied on perhaps one particular methodology for encryption, and it was based on the fact that that the factoring is an exponentially hard problem on a classical computer, and I think there's always been some nervousness about that because one never knows where a breakthrough in mathematics could have changed that situation. So. I think it's a situation that we just have to live with right now. I'm not sure that there's really too much more we can do other than planning for a post-quantum future which is already well underway in terms of new algorithms being developed that are resistant to attack from a quantum computer, for example.
Private companies or governments can abuse that power in data storage and so on. But with the quantum revolution, then there is the potential of intercepting our communication almost in real time. And plus, the also what really concerns us is also the infrastructures like power grids and transportation systems. And that is a sort of power that might be in the hands of a very few, or at least the ones that maybe have a breakthrough in a discovery.
You're going to be worried about much more existential problems than that if you have this capability, right?
That is what I was referring to. And we also mentioned Google. So what if Google tomorrow is able to break cryptography and they don't tell it to anyone because maybe they want to keep it a secret for a little longer? Do you think that could be the case, and maybe they might use it for good purpose?
Well, I can't speak for Google.
No, I'm saying not Google, a company, a private company.
Yeah, no, I think no. So that's a fair question, right? And I think it is a concern, right, that a company completely independently could develop a capability that would, from which they would have a lot of leverage potentially over people. So I don't know how we address that problem necessarily, but I do fall back on the argument that I had before, which is that this is not going to be deployed as a general tool. It would have to be used very selectively, but in the hands of the wrong people with bad intentions, it could be used selectively against very important targets.
What is your opinion about these post-quantum cryptography systems, the NIST efforts?
I think it's an important thing because I think it seems to me relatively inevitable that we will have a quantum computer at some day that will be able to attack the public key cryptography. So I think it's an important effort, and the question, I think one question is how rapidly should this be rolled out? How should the effort be expanded, be made bigger, be made faster, for example? I don't have too much of an opinion on that myself, other than I think it needs to happen, and it is happening, and I'll leave it to others to decide, sort of what resources maybe need to be put into that. But I think there's something that's important, I think, to realize even about a post quantum future, and that is that even if we switched over to some kind of encryption technology tomorrow that was resistant to attacks from a quantum computer, there's a lot of data that's sitting around that's still vulnerable to attack because it was encrypted with RSA, right? So, every government collects communication information from other countries and other entities, and they don't throw this information away. It sits on servers all around the world, and there's a lot of valuable information potentially. Even if it were, 5 years from now decrypted, it still could cause a lot of damage. So I think that's the thing that the national security type people need to worry about, and they do worry about, I'm sure, is that gap. Even in between when we have something that's resistant to attack from a quantum computer, there's a lot of data that still has been collected and has vulnerability, if it were to be decrypted.
Symmetric encryption is generally regarded as, especially larger key size, larger bit bit length, symmetric encryption is largely regarded as still resistant, to even the power of quantum computing. It's that key exchange at the asymmetric that get it started to have the conversation and switch to the symmetric, which is faster also, right? And in that case, it may be, and what I want to know is, in your opinion, would grabbing the start of conversations be is something that you think falls into that category, because then the symmetric encryption might still be even being used after in the post-quantum world, if you got that first initial negotiation, right, of like, okay, let's share files and store them here, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I haven't, this is not something I've thought a lot about, being more of a technical person. But I think you could imagine a world in which RSA doesn't go away necessarily, right? Because for some of the reasons that I mentioned, right, which is that there's a lot of data that's encrypted that's not likely to be broken due to the expense of doing it with a quantum computer, or just the sheer volume of it, right? So it could be that there is a two-tiered system at some point that evolves where there's still RSA cryptography used in some capacity with an option to use the post-quantum algorithms and algorithms. So that's, yeah, I mean, I don't know what form that would take necessarily, but I think that's generally something that people probably are thinking about and is maybe even likely to happen. I'm not an expert on the post-quantum algorithms. I know they take more resources, and so it could be that it's maybe not something that runs on your cell phone, for example. Maybe you need a desktop computer, laptop computer to enact that particular encryption. And so again, this would lead to a two-tiered sort of thing where maybe RSA doesn't go away entirely, but under certain circumstances you end up using using the post-quantum. But there's a lot of advances still to be made on all of these fronts. So I think it's a little bit hard to predict that. But I think that there are people thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think we've even heard that a dual mode deployment is in the works for situations where you really can't risk either way. Because imagine you switch to post-quantum and then only exclusively, and then find out that that is less safe than this interim period. The last 2 years before it's come online, and you say, okay, great, I switched. And but we now know that actually is flawed already. And then she's okay, roll back. So maybe both. And so yeah, that sounds like a pretty reasonable approach to say dual mode.
I was wondering about how much resources it takes to implement the post-quantum safe, quantum safe cryptography, and whether it can be deployed widely as RSA is used now or not.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert. I just know it takes more resources, and that potentially it could be problematic for, say, a cell phone to be able to do these kinds of things, and so maybe you need more resources than that.
But you also mentioned before that breakthrough can happen, and eventually more in the math world, because we still rely on a sort of assumption, a math assumption. And what is the case? What would happen? So all the RSA and the public key encryption would be vulnerable then? I mean, as a scientist, I am asking, do you think researching around quantum physics, quantum mechanics would eventually make a breakthrough in math and discovering that the kind of factoring is not only one way, but can be both ways? More an opinion than...
Yeah, that's a little bit hard to say. I mean, I think, stepping back a bit from that question, I would just say that there's a lot going on, I think, in the field right now where one discipline is informing the other about what things are possible, right? So I think computer scientists have learned a lot by incorporating, the quantum mechanics and quantum physics into their thinking, and how that shapes their overall perception of information science and what's possible, things like that. So I would just say that generally speaking, there is there's a lot of back and forth and people learning from each other in the different fields, and so it's possible that insights in quantum physics, when interpreted the right way by mathematicians, could actually lead to something. But I can't give you a specific example of where something like that might happen. I'll just make a general statement that there's a lot of cross-fertilization in the scientific disciplines between quantum physics and engineering and computer science, and I think it remains to be seen, whether there's breakthroughs come from that. There have definitely been instances already where classical algorithms have been improved based on quantum algorithms that people have developed, and it's caused a re-examination of the classical algorithms and led to improvement in some cases. So that's an example of a little bit of that feedback.
Yeah. Again, because you are a computer scientist, all the public key encryption system that we have are quite recent in a way. I mean, looking at history, if you think, it's just from the 90s that we started to rely heavily on those algorithms, and even more, I would say, in the past 10, 15 years, because of the acceleration of the internet and relying on the internet for any kind of communication, not only the email and web surfing, but everything. Do you think maybe we rely too much on that system, considering how important it is now, how critical it is now, or?
I could only address that in thinking about, well, okay, what's the alternative, right? So in the absence of an alternative, we seem to be doing the thing that makes the most sense, right? So over-reliance on cryptography, I think, has come about because it seemed to be the only reasonable solution at the time. And as you said, with the exponential increase in communication, enabled by various technologies, internet and mobile and all that kind of thing, right? There was obviously some need for having some kind of information protection. This was a convenient thing to rely on, to be implemented, and so. Maybe in retrospect, someone will figure out that, we should have done something else. But I think what was done was the practical and logical thing to do at the time.
If you think about the blockchain and all the cryptocurrencies, those are particularly vulnerable today, probably, more than anything else.
Right.
A part of that that's really, that stands out to me is how digital identity, and so it's largely digital signature algorithms, first used to sign a binary file that you were going to download, and it's okay, before I install this firmware, I need to know that it's from the company and does not full of backdoors. And now 10 web sessions per day, identity verification between server and client, or app and the back end. And so if there's so many digital identities all the time with things being signed, it might be that digital identity kind of was one of those runaway, like, okay, we need something for this. Okay, I need to know it's you, who you say you are.
Right.
But it's like, if so many are being generated all the time and no one's checking the real world, then maybe the identity provider is actually the thing that you should worry about being compromised. It's like, give me $5 and I'll say you're Paulo. Digital identity kind of like all of a sudden we're using it maybe too much. That's what strikes me.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting observation. For sure. Authentication is a very important aspect of that, right? And that's another thing that people are thinking about in the technical world, is how do you really authenticate? And that provides the security for the sort of digital signature exchange and things like that you're talking about. And we're addicted to convenience, right? And so we only have ourselves to blame for this. I certainly like using DocuSign a lot more than having to download a file and somehow put my scanned signature and pasting it in and then saving it and then sending it back, right? And nobody wants to do that kind of stuff. And God forbid that you would actually put it in the mail, right? To sign a copy of something in the mail, right? Does anybody do that anymore? So we've become addicted to that, to that convenience in many other ways as well.
The other week, 2 weeks ago, you were in this conference here at UCLA that was also titled "The Ethics of Quantum."
So it was, yeah. We were just chatting about that actually earlier. Yeah, it was last week. It was last Wednesday, I think, just a week ago today. There was a conference organized on basically quantum policy, as related to issues of security and privacy. And so, yeah, I was on one of the panels for that was discussing some of the same issues we've talked about today. What is the threat and when is the threat coming and things like that, and what should the governments be doing, or society in general, right? And one of the interesting things that got raised in that was the question of who's going to be controlling the post-quantum cryptography, and the question of backdoors and things like this, right? It's going to be the same set of issues are going to come up, yet again, about who has access to this and who should be controlling it, and whoever controls it obviously can have special access, under certain circumstances. So that was something I hadn't really thought a lot about myself, but I can see that's obviously an important issue.
What is your take from that conference? Do you think everyone was aware, or there were some solutions coming from there, or is still a fragmented world?
What I took away from that is that people are starting to think about this problem and offer potential solutions or potential scenarios for it, but it's far from clear what the best path is forward. But again, it's not really my field. These are for the more people who are trying to inform policy decisions, and that's not my forte. I'm a physicist.
Right. From a policy perspective, we also look at the advocacy that might be needed to deal with this situation.
Well, I think IEEE is definitely one. American Physical Society is another one, because this is at least on the technical side, these are the societies people tend to belong to, and they would be, at least I would say, probably on the front lines of advocacy, in these areas.
Also internationally, they could.
Yes, they definitely have international footprint for sure.
IEEE is excellent for standards, radio communication, or Ethernet, right, internationally.
Right.
What do you think of ISO for perhaps something like standards of levels of deployed cybersecurity here or there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit outside of my area. I'm a scientist, so I'm not sure that I could speak to ISO or any other organization. I mean, NIST has certainly taken a lead, has taken the lead and taken a role in this, and I think they are, they set standards in a lot of areas, right? And so I think they have been active in this area, and they're definitely thinking about what standards should be there and how people can be held to those standards.
Fascinating, the approach that you have started with and then made great progress. What's fascinating the most to me is it's silicon, it's germanium, it's the semiconductor elements that we are familiar with, that are our friends of the last, right? We have really learned how to use these elements, and it's plain old electrons. And so there's all these different modalities, but this strikes me as a particularly good strategy and thing to pursue. So my question then for you is, when did you get the sense that you'd be able to do management of a qubit in silicon? And did you come to the research, or did you say, I think this might be there, and then go to see if it was true and discover that yes, and yeah.
Okay, so yeah, boy, I could go on for a long time about that.
That's why I have to.
Because that is my forte. So there were some important papers that came out in the late 90s, 98, 99 timeframe where people said, okay, for qubit you need a two-level system. The spin of an electron is a great is a great two-level system. It's the two energy levels are controlled by a magnetic field that you apply, and you have great control over these kinds of things. And there were concrete proposals made about how to use the spin of an electron in various ways to use electrons as qubits, basically. And so I read those papers, and it sounded very plausible to me that this was a good approach, and so I got involved in this research in 2001, actually. So I've been in this field a very long time now. As I tell people, I got in at the time when nothing worked, basically, and people were still trying to figure out, what qubits are going to work. I remember, people asking in the early 2000s, what qubit's going to work? What's going to be the winner? What qubit system is going to be the one that we get to that we get to work, and it has the kind of fidelities and things like that that are needed. And I remember a very smart guy answering that question at a conference one time, and he said the answer is all of them. They're all going to work. And it turned out that he was basically right, because here we are maybe 15 years later from that point, and we still see ion trap-based systems, and we see superconducting systems, neutral atoms, semiconductors. So all of these ideas that were there at the very beginning have all kind of survived, and they're still being pushed forward. I think that there are particular advantages of the semiconductor system because of the fact that, as you pointed out, it's been worked on for a very, very long time, in the semiconductor industry and computing industry. So there's a huge infrastructure there that can be leveraged for making a semiconductor-based quantum computer. But like every technology, it has its challenges. It has certain advantages in terms of speed, in terms of size. The qubits are very dense, so you can potentially put 1 million on a chip, for example. But then there are other problems that need to be solved as well. So all of these technologies have various obstacles that need to be overcome in order to really get to building a scalable system. So I think the jury is still out. Superconducting qubits look like they're in a pretty good spot right now. They're making hundreds of qubits, but I think that all the other systems can make an argument too about their advantages, and so we'll see.